Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, November 2nd, 2017. A historical day yesterday if you are a Blue Mooner day. For Manchester City fans, Duane, yesterday, a player that means a lot now in the recent history of the club, has become the most prolific scorer for Manchester City.
Sergio Aguero became the all-time leading scorer, broke a 72-year-old record with the goal that salted it away, the 3-2 goal against Napoli.
And it's not like 500 goals or something. It's like 178, right? 177 was the record?
Something like that, yeah.
250 was United that Rooney broke last year. But that tells you how difficult the history of scoring goals was for Manchester City in the last 70-something years. But Kun Aguero with the important goal.
Well, sure. I mean, what it tells you is the lack of games that they played compared to the top teams in Europe over that time. At the same time, I mean, City had a brief spell in the 70s where they were not where they are now, but did okay. But yeah, no, it really speaks to that. I mean, you're United, you're playing deep in the Champions League every year, so there's just more games to score more goals. But certainly, it was a nice goal and a great goal to get it, and a worthwhile game. And look, during the broadcast yesterday, the commentator called City the best team in Europe right now, which is not something that we talked about that yesterday. We talked about PSG, and I said that I wasn't quite ready to go there with City, and I think that has to do with just my history with the club and the history of the club and sort of a reluctance to embrace that. But
that certainly PTSD, the same PTSD that you had for TFC, you had it way before with Manchester City.
Yeah, and look, it was a hell of a game for them, and unfortunately for Napoli, which is a great team, that just they struggled. They lost to Shakhtar, which is really has put them in a very, very precarious position in the Champions League. 2 games left, 6 points back. They obviously have to win out. Hope they can reverse a goal differential and help Shakhtar loses both of its remaining games. So that's going to be difficult for them to advance in the group, and it would be a shame to see Napoli out of this competition at this point, but. That's the breaks. We talked yesterday again about how the group stage sort of lacks some meaning. So in this particular case, we probably shouldn't complain when a club that we would have expected to advance is on the cusp of going out. They weren't officially eliminated, but certainly, knife to the throat at this point. But they, on the up note to Napoli, they played both of their games against City now. So City at top of the group with 12 points. They have a game left with Shakhtar and Feyenoord left in the group. So you would think that Napoli, if they can take care of business against Shakhtar, they could probably hope the City does the job for them and they can get out of this thing still. But what a game, though. What a game. It was so fast. I commented on Twitter in the middle of it that it was like watching an NHL game. And a couple people made fun of me because I made a hockey reference and they made hoser jokes. But nonetheless, it was so like back and forth.
Old Canadians talking about soccer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was about to write ice hockey when I wrote it, but then I can't bring myself as a Canadian to call it ice hockey because
there's another kind of hockey? What are you talking about?
Well, there's what most of the world calls hockey is played on grass or turf, actually, for the most part. But yes.
Well, a lot of people who play hockey here play on grass, but that's a totally different grass, totally different hockey. It's called PlayStation. But let's talk about the other 2 teams in that group. You mentioned Sevilla and Shakhtar Donetsk and Feyenoord in the same group as Napoli and Manchester City. 3-1 for Shakhtar Donetsk yesterday. Feyenoord gets the opening goal with a nice header from a ball crossed in. And we're like, okay, maybe they're back. Maybe they finally recovered from the retirement of Dirk Kuyt. But no, Shakhtar Donetsk put 3 past the goalkeeper and another win. Impressive result so far for this Ukrainian club.
Well, the Ukrainian league is that sneaky league that if you look at the coefficients, they actually come in there fairly decently, and they've done pretty well. In they advanced to the round of 16. I'll let them get much further than that generally, but But they have had some deep performances in the competition if you consider the round of 16 deep. And I think that we're too guilty sometimes of getting caught up in, only viewing the world through what Real Madrid does and things like that. And we'll get to them in a minute. But certainly they probably are the surprise, I would say, of the Champions League so far. I would suggest, just based on what's happening here. I mean, you could look at Monaco's struggles, but you saw an amount of players that they lost, so it's hard to really get too surprised about that. Leipzig, after their great start, hasn't, we'll talk about them in a second now too. They have struggled since, and looks maybe like Besiktas and Porto could get out of that group. Besiktas, good result for them to get the draw yesterday, and obviously Spurs topping the group, Group H. That's a real shock in this one too. And Dortmund, wow, 1-1 yesterday too.
What's going on with Dortmund? It's not the first result in this year's Champions League that we see them let point on the field, that we see them step up.
Well, they had their ass handed to them by Real Madrid in that game, so that was certainly not something that should have been telling right off the top. I was talking to a few people that follow the German league a little more closely than I do, and I'll be the first to admit that the Bundesliga is not the top of my priorities each week. I have to watch a lot of other games, and when it gets into the winter, I'll probably watch a bit more of it. But right now, I haven't been able to dedicate that much time to it. But people that do follow it closely have said that you could have seen yesterday's result coming a little ways away. They certainly have been struggling in the league. Only one win in the last 6 games or something like that, and that was in the German Cup against a third division side. So hardly lighting the world on fire that way. But Applewell has done well in the past. They made it to the round of 16 once before, and they're not a pushover per se in this group, but still you'd expect BVB to get past a team like that. And 5 points back now, you wouldn't really think that there's much way back, and they're not even set for the Europa League based on yesterday's results, and maybe they don't want the Europa League based on yesterday's result either.
Exactly. Let's go quickly through the other results. Besiktas Monaco at home for Besiktas in Turkey. 1-1, not a bad result versus Monaco. But the game of the day, the game that got everybody's attention pretty much, was Tottenham Hotspurs, Real Madrid at Wembley. Yeah, those Wembley jitters are gone, Duane.
Yeah, I mean, look, they absolutely, and Spurs, they got a big game coming up with City in about 6 weeks now that I think a lot of people might be circling on their calendar in terms of arguing that Spurs is the only team that might be able to rein in Manchester City in the league this year, and I include Manchester United in that, just based on the overall, just watching them play.
But based on form of the last 2 weeks, I would say 2-3 weeks, Tottenham is probably the only contender as of now.
Yeah, and certainly I think that's a lot of people are saying that too. But to stick it back to this, to get the 3-1 result against Real Madrid certainly is a marker. And we joked before how Spursy it is that Tottenham has the best point total in the last 2 years and has finished second twice and somehow managed to lose to Leicester. I have a Spurs friend who rants and raves about that. He gets a couple beers in and he talks about blanking Leicester all the time.
That loss against Chelsea. For Leicester, for Tottenham, that gave the trophy to Leicester. That's the Kun Aguero moment for Chelsea and Leicester fans.
Yes, exactly. At any rate, that's a different story, different league, obviously. But what a marking game for them too. And the English clubs in general in this competition. Liverpool's not setting the world on fire, but they got the result yesterday, and they are top of the group and look to advance. Chelsea obviously had a bit of a tough week this week. Roma's been playing very well in this competition, but they look like they're probably set for a second place finish in this.
It's just 1 point. They're just 1 point behind Roma, so it's not that bad.
Yeah, the other, City and Spurs both topping the group, undefeated, is something to really hang your hat on, because for the last few years there's been a lot of talk about the English teams just not performing in the Champions League, and here they are doing so well in this group stage. Now, look, the cynic will say, talk to me in February, right? And we'll see what happens when the round of 16 happens. And as a City supporter, I have nightmares of the balls pulling out in Real Madrid, falling out of the hat, which is a real possibility based on how things will shake out.
Yeah, I doubt that it happens, though, just because of the fact that Real Madrid, well, it's Real Madrid, and they're going to figure out things eventually. So I'm not worried for Madrid per se. They're, 8 points behind in La Liga of Barcelona, so I'm not that worried. And the fact that it's Dortmund, too, right? That third team in this group, it's Dortmund, and they're already 5 points back of Madrid.
Well, no, I'm talking about they'll finish second in the group, though. If you're looking at,
oh yeah, for sure,
3 points behind. One of the first place teams is going to draw them. So.
Yeah, well, yeah, it means that AB Besiktas, who have already clinched the group, or another one of that sort, might get Madrid.
It can't be Barcelona. So it'd be anyone with Barcelona, basically.
So there's a fair chance it's going to be an English team. So because of the fact that it can't be a Spanish team, and there's going to be 5 or 4 top of the group English team, so the probabilities are very high that it will be any English team but Tottenham to face Madrid.
There you go. Which is, as I said, that's my nightmare right there.
Madrid in the round of 18.
It wouldn't be the first time that it's happened either in the Champions League, and they haven't formed. Well, I mean, they've got results against Real Madrid, but it's always been, not to revitalize or look back at City's history right now, but the results they've gotten against the big clubs typically in the Champions League have happened once the big clubs are home and cooled in the group stage. So City doesn't really have a marker outside of beating PSG in the round of 16 a couple years ago. So it's going to still be a lot to prove once they get to that stage, Kevin. Today, of course, we have a whole bunch of Europa League games. And as always in the Europa League group stage, it's very difficult for us to break these games down because there's 6,000 of them.
There was 64 teams in the group stage of Europa League?
Something like that, yeah. And I'm just looking quickly at this list right now. And to be honest, I haven't, Lyon Everton will be the game that will probably be on TV, which is a mess because Everton's been crap in this competition. I usually pick, as I said many times before, you just look for the weirdest matchup and try and pick it.
And just trying to watch teams that you don't know. Trying to watch teams with players you have no idea who they are. And teams that, what's that logo? What's that kit? Never seen it before. Let's discover the world of football together.
There you go. 4:00 games. You got Arsenal's playing. Who the hell are they playing? Red Star Belgrade. That's an interesting one. Red Star. There's Canadian content in that.
Yeah. Milan Borjan.
Yes, exactly. I don't know if he'll necessarily be playing that one. I can't say as I've been following Red Star that closely this year. Quickly looking at this, Milan is a team that fascinates me in many, many ways. They've, of course, not been having a great season, considering the amount of money they spent. I'll be watching them in this competition throughout, as I do think that the talent that they have there, even if they are struggling a little bit to gel, should, if they can get out of this group stage, make them dangerous in the knockout round. But the thing about the Europa League is it's hard to really handicap until you see what teams drop back down. And you have a situation where Dortmund could be coming in this and rounding into form. And you've got Arsenal in here, who I said off the top of the year, I think that with the amount of money and talent that they supposedly have there, there's no excuse for them not to go deep in this as well. Who's to say what this will look like when it comes at the end? Is there any game, if you look at the schedule real quick there, Kevin, that you really want to watch at 4:00? I as people know that I'm going to have to sleep for a while after this show because this is my equivalent of 10 o'clock at night. But I'll probably wake up for those 4:00 games and pick one of them out of the hat and watch it. Maybe. I'm just trying to look here to see what's the weirdest game I can find on here.
There's one really interesting one. Istanbul Başakşehir versus Offenheim. This game is interesting. This new club in Istanbul with the Emre Can and other few names that we have heard before that are trying to raise the level of this club and make it one of the top 3 clubs. They're trying to take over Galatasaray or a Fenerbahce spot with this performance over the last few years. And this time it's in Europa League and playing Offenheim. It's an interesting matchup. In a German team that their coach has really taken the spotlight of this team, but it's the new way of coaching. Young manager with a different type of player personnel management, really a player's coach, really working with his players to have a project going forward that keeps on developing and creating new styles of play and an identity. And Offenheim is really interesting to play. So I think that's the game I'll watch today at 2 p.m.
All right, fair enough. Atlanta is kind of a fun team to watch too. They might be.
No, they're eliminated, Duane, of the playoff. MLS Cup playoff. Atlanta's done. No.
There's other syllable in that one.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. They're in Serie A. There you go. Joey should buy them just to really confuse matters. Nonetheless.
Why not?
All right. We got a preview at MLS playoff game. We got Dave Clark lined up. So let's take a quick break. We'll get Dave on the line, and we'll talk about the Whitecaps and the Seattle Sounders.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
Joining us on Soccer Today to talk about the Seattle Sounders versus their Cascadia rivals, the Whitecaps, we have Dave Clark, the original Sounder at heart. Dave, how you doing this morning?
It's a great day.
It's a great day. Dave, look, I woke up from the 0-0 draw recently, but it was not the most thrilling first match of this. But did the Sounders get what they wanted out of that first leg? Are they happy with not allowing a goal in Vancouver?
I understand why Brian Schmetzer played as conservative as he did. You're missing Clint Dempsey, Victor Rodriguez, Jordan Morris, Brad Evans, Osvaldo Alonso, Gustav Svensson. That's a lot of talent on the bench. So to play conservative and go for a shutout and maybe a miracle goal was understandable, but I still am not willing to think that is desirable. 1-1, when you host the second leg, getting an away goal would be huge. A 1-1 draw would have set them up so much better than this 0-0 does, because tonight there are a lot of scenarios where they can play well and fail to advance.
Certainly, and it actually, in Seattle's history last year aside, there have been a lot of cases where that exact scenario has happened. How do you think that do they go out and try and get in the front foot and get the early goal there? Because Vancouver scores an early goal or goal at all before Seattle does, and this tie takes an entirely different look. Suddenly Seattle has to score twice. So how do they approach tonight? Do they try and get out and get aggressive off the hop?
I would like to say yes, but the thing that has defined this team this year has been their defense. And so I think they're going to be confident in it. Stephen Fry had the most shutouts of any keeper this season. The defense basically had 3 massive eggs that they laid early when they were playing like a 6-string right back, and had 3 away legs where they gave up, where they lost by 3 goals. But since that, you take that out, they're a top defensive team in the league, on par with Toronto and Sporting Kansas City. So I expect them to play their normal game. I don't expect them to adjust their tactics. They're going to have Clint Dempsey back. They're going to have Osvaldo Alonso, Gustav Svensson, and maybe even Victor Rodriguez. And Chad Marshall was a full participant in practice as well, despite leaving the game injured. So they're going to be as close to full health as possible. I expect to see the standard Seattle tactics where they ride their defense and have a very patient, methodical, possession-based attack.
You mentioned all the walking wounded that will be back for tonight's game. How important in the result of Sunday's game, more the fact that Seattle had a lot of injured players?
I think it was, Seattle's offense is, I'm searching for the right word. It's good when it works well, but it's also been incredibly inconsistent. Despite having the talent around it that they had last year, they just haven't been as goal dangerous as they should be. So getting that result was essentially biding time to get Clint Dempsey on the field and maybe a Victor Rodriguez. Harry Shipp was great with the Chicago Fire, but he's an afterthought here. He might be the 19th player on this roster.
Yeah, he was the same in Montreal, by the way, Dave.
Well, I think he had 20 starts in Montreal, and in the last half of the season, he had 2 starts, the final game of the season and that leg against Vancouver. There are many games when he was healthy and didn't even make the 18. And that's kind of that's a player with something like 80 starts in MLS history, who the Seattle Sounders treat as a very deep bench guy. And they had to start him and count on his maybe scoring. And he maybe scored twice. Like, he got very close to goal. The best chances that Seattle had were because of Harry Shipp's runs. If you replace Harry Shipp with Clint Dempsey, you're much more likely to score goals.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. When you're looking at the first game and when you're looking at the whole first round of semifinals across Major League Soccer, a lot of teams left the onus of results for the second leg. How different are you expecting the game to be tonight? Not necessarily just the fact that it's in Seattle, the returning players for Seattle as well, but the fact that tonight there needs to be a winner.
Yeah, and I think that's where the resilience that they showed last year, leg 1 was very much took to advance to the MLS Cup and win it eventually in Toronto. And that's how they approached leg 1. That is not the same approach that they've taken throughout the season. They're just a better team. Frankly, that's true about Toronto as well. They're both much better teams than they were when they made MLS Cup last year. But now it's about getting there. And to get there, they know they have to win. And this is a team that, when forced to get results, has done so. Second in the West is pretty good. Now, that's only good for 7th on the overall table, but they've gotten their results this year, battling through injuries. They had a little bit of a hangover early in the season, and they've developed an identity. They've become a team that counts on both fullbacks to get forward regularly. I expect that to happen more tonight than it did on the road. They're a team that likes one of their defensive midfielders to get forward as well, essentially just playing with Osvaldo Alonso and the 2 center backs sitting deep. And even then, sometimes Ramon Torres gets into the attack, leaving them with only 2 men back. That might be dangerous against Vancouver because they can counter through Fredy Montero, and Fredy Montero against 2 defenders is something that Seattle fans know can be dangerous.
Well, Dan, I was going to ask this a little later, but since you bring Vancouver up now, we might as well jump into it. One of my standard questions in a preview interview is to ask, someone to tell us how to beat the team that they cover. So I'll ask you that. How does Vancouver beat Seattle tonight?
I think we saw that actually in their first game between the two this season, where Fredy Montero nicked the last-minute goal. That was exactly what he's good at. It's what Vancouver's become good at. They transitioned fairly quickly to him. They attempted to just back on Sunday night. The other thing that Vancouver's very good at that Seattle can be lax on is defending the back post on things like flick-on headers. And as your audience knows, Vancouver is very good at set pieces that use flick-on headers and other flick-on type movements to get it to Fredy Montero. Essentially, they're facing the exact type of player who causes this defense trouble. So it's a cause for concern, and it comes to a former Sounder being if they lose tonight, it will be because of Fredy Montero probably getting a long-range goal and a set-piece goal.
I don't think it's any secret that Vancouver has always been the third wheel in the Cascadia rivalry. Not to say that there isn't some edge there and some rivalry there. There obviously is between all 3 teams, but clearly Portland, Seattle dominates most of the headlines, most of the attention in this. Do you think the addition of Montero to this as an opposing, a player that formerly played for Seattle has added a little bit more to this, has made the Seattle fans a little bit more excited by the opportunity to try and defeat the Whitecaps?
I think it added more to the players than it did to the fans. For the most part, fans here were over Fredy Montero by the time that he left. Now, there are some loyalists, I'm one of them, that wishes he was still here. But for the most part, the fans thought it was time to move on. But some of the players, Brad Evans most notably, when it was announced that Fredy Montero was signing with Vancouver through that loan agreement, Evans called out Montero and said that he would never sign for a rival. And it was interesting to see a player, one, call out a former teammate like that, and two, call it out about Vancouver, because I never really thought that, I thought this was a polite rivalry, if that makes any sort of sense. Whereas I could see players saying never sign with Portland, never sign with the Galaxy. Having that statement about the Vancouver Whitecaps was surprising. It may just indicate how some of the other players in the locker room feel about Freddie Montero choosing Vancouver.
Well, it brings me to my next question, Dave. When we're looking at the playoff in the Western Conference, 3 out of 4 teams left are Cascadia team. Does it bring a bit more enthusiasm to the playoff from your perspective, from the fans' perspective in Cascadia? Does it change a bit if you're just looking at it from with rose-colored glasses, looking at the next journey? It could potentially be a playoff for Seattle where you face all your rivals before going wherever MLS Cup could be if you get those 2 series win. Is it something special to have your rivals in front of you?
Absolutely. I know Portland has knocked Seattle out of the MLS Cup playoffs. Seattle has not knocked out Portland. So there is a little bit of desire for revenge there, whether it's at the team level. I know Brian Schmetzer still has used Caleb Porter's reaction to that playoff victory as motivation, or at the fan level. The ability to face Portland would mean thousands of more seats sold, would mean a more vibrant atmosphere, would mean better TV ratings than, Seattle Houston isn't going to attract anybody. So it's good on that aspect, but it's also good because, frankly, it makes travel easier. It makes travel easier for fans. It makes travel easier for players. It would be any of these teams would essentially not have to leave the Pacific Northwest until MLS Cup final. For teams with health concerns that are longer term, Jordan Morris, for example, not going to be ready tonight, but if they advance, could be ready after the 19-day layoff before the next round. Having him be able to just stay at home is an advantage. For a team like Portland, who got devastated by injuries when they pulled off their 0-0, getting those extra weeks and having everything close to home is also an advantage with their current injury status.
When we're looking at the playoffs in Major League Soccer as a whole, Dave, there's been one topic that's unavoidable in the last few weeks is refereeing, in a way that the lack of calls made and a difference of how a game is managed by the referee in the playoff versus just weeks ago in the regular season. We've seen this affect the result or the lack thereof in the first game between Vancouver and Seattle, where a few times on both sides calls were not made and a free kick about 30 yards, 25 yards deep were not given. And we know Vancouver, how set pieces are important in their play with players like Watson and Breck Shea that are very dangerous in the box. Will we see the same thing tonight? Will we still see the referee, quote unquote, letting them play and not calling the game like it's supposed to be?
I absolutely expect the referee to let it go. It's happened for every other game. There have been games since the first leg that we've watched other playoff games, and they were also allowed to be, more violent than the regular season. And it's kind of interesting. Clint Dempsey missed the leg one because he raised an elbow somewhat inadvertently on a swim move, raised the elbow and did make contact with the head. Christian Roldan was elbowed in the head twice. Only once was a card given. It was a yellow, not a red. And who is it? Ali Ghazal, who managed to headlock both Osvaldo Alonso and Nico Ladero, dragging them across the field. A double headlock, chokeholds around the neck, and that was merely a fine. When supposedly the rule is when you aggressively strike the head or neck, it's supposed to be an automatic red. So I think we know, if the game should be less violent, they would have suspended a player that tried to choke out 2 guys at the same time. They didn't. They're not, the referees and the league are not concerned with the level of violence at this point in the playoffs.
It doesn't make any sense, but that's a broken record that I've ranted about for years. So at any rate, we'll move past that, Dave. Look, you sort of inadvertently dismissed the possibility of hosting the MLS Cup final, thus eliminating the Red Bulls, which from a Toronto perspective, I thank you for, although two road goals, they do seem fairly safe in that regards. There was an article in MLS Soccer this week, MLSsoccer.com this week, talking about the gap in talent difference between the West and the East. I think you have a bit of a different perspective on that. Is the gap as big as some people are letting on? Obviously, anything can happen in a one-off final. I don't want to even pretend that it's not possible that the West team won't win the MLS Cup final. But is there a gap developing there?
Oh, absolutely. The East was better. I mean, there are reasons why Seattle struggled. There are reasons why Portland struggled. But, I mean, part of the reason the East was better is because Real Salt Lake waited a month, essentially, to decide to have a season. And the LA Galaxy waited an entire year to, I mean, they just blew off that season, you know. So when you're looking at, you know, those are two perennial powerhouses out west, and RSL almost made themselves a playoff contender, and I think if they were given another month, they would have made the playoffs. But, you know, LA might not make the playoffs again next year. You take those two out, you take, you know, when we look at preseason a year ago or even 2 years ago, both of those sides would have been MLS Cup contenders, and now they're just cast-offs. In the East, on the other hand, you have the surge from Atlanta, which puts them in some ways on par versus the competition to where Seattle was. Toronto, Duane, you know, they're better. They're just the Vasquez addition is enormous. Their comfort defensively, you know, to have what is without a doubt the best attack in the modern era, and to have a defense that's top three. Toronto is clearly amazing. Chicago finding a way, whether it was Bastian Schweinsteiger early or Nikolic, they're great now, or at least they were until the playoffs. I think the East is just that much better. And while Portland and Seattle are probably both teams that could contend with an Eastern Conference winner, I don't see that from Vancouver due to their horrible defense. I don't see it from Houston. They're inconsistent, and their road form the entire year was trash. Portland has a defensive surge late in the season that is good, and we know that Seattle can grind out results that are incredibly boring, but enough for victory.
I know Toronto fans that are logical about it. You know, no one is looking past Columbus, especially, and I think we can almost write NYCFC off here based on their playoff form. It's another story too. We'll have another interview on that one. But Dave, before we say goodbye, though, not playoff news, but we knew this was coming. But it was confirmed today that the Sounders 2 will be playing in Tacoma next year. Just tell us a bit what that will mean for the overall program.
So the thing that doesn't change is where Sounders 2 is going to practice. They're still going to be training and co-located at the Sounders training facility. What's moving is just the games. And it's moving to, if people don't know, Tacoma is a 30 to 45-minute drive on most days south of Seattle. It's a satellite community, many hundreds of thousands. And it's hosted the Seattle Mariners AAA affiliate for some time. So it's a city that does get out and support their minor league sports. It's a city with a unique identity, unlike, you know, some suburbs that just look to the center city. Tacoma looks within quite a bit and has its own character. So what it does give them is the opportunity to market. The quest for wins will be a little bit higher now that the Rainiers. It's a lot easier to market a team that wins games than it is a team that struggles. And the Rainiers are taking over business operations similar to what you see in Reno and Rio Grande Valley FC. It's great for the people of the South Sound who, for the most part, particularly even further south in Olympia or out in the peninsula out here, they'll be able to catch professional soccer where making a trip all the way to Seattle might be a little bit difficult.
All right, fair enough. I would ask you about Kyle Beckerman's dreads, but maybe everyone else have already put their opinion out with that. The MLS Soccer just put up an article that popped up, so it went back in my head. Dave, enjoy
2017 ruins everything. Everything is bad about this year.
Hey.
The only thing good about Kyle Beckerman at this point was his dreads. I mean, it's not like he was a good player this season.
There you go.
Dave, yeah. I can attest that 2017 is terrible. If you were in Montreal, like we had a stint of 29 straight losses, all sports and teams combined in this city. 2017 is awful.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, Dave. Sounder at heart, the original Sounder at heart. Dave, thanks as always for your time. Enjoy the game tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Yeah, don't push me because I'm close to the edge. That's been my sports fandom in Montreal over the last few weeks.
Oh dear, that's a throwback there. I was listening to 90s Euro dance music last night all night. So
Ace of Base.
Yeah, I heard Ace of Base in there. There was a bit of crazy, a lot of so it was a good night that way. You got to stay awake at 4 a.m. somehow.
Yeah, somehow.
Yeah, I don't really have an opinion on Kyle Beckerman's dreads other than I looked at him like, why is that accountant standing there? I said, oh wow, there you go. Who knew?
Yeah, who knew?
Exactly. All things end, I guess.
Yeah, that's 2017 for you. Everything changes. Everything changes all the time. Why? Why do we make changes? Just let me be.
Yes. Well, you've got that whole, you talked about the Montreal, of course, curse. And then, here in Toronto, it's almost like Bizarro World because the sports here is kind of flipping around the other way, that we're not used to this either with the Leafs doing well and TFC, obviously. Raptors are kind of doing what they're supposed to do. Kevin, we talked a bit about Seattle yesterday, so not a big wrap on the show today, too. But quickly, we should maybe get a prediction for tonight and some general thoughts on what Dave had to say and what you think is going to happen tonight.
Well, it is interesting to me the fact that if you're looking at the first leg of this game, Cal Robinson was very agitated on the sideline, really taken by the lack of calls, not necessarily for his team, but a lacking calls in general. And a few times, we've seen Vancouver being effective on set pieces. We see them taking advantage of a free kick they have from far away with a Kendall Watson just jumping in the box and putting it behind the keeper. We've seen this happen. And when they have a foul that's called for the other team, but the same exact scenario is not called for yourself, you feel like you're being taken away a chance, basically. You're like, because a set piece close to the box or just 30, 40 yards in for Vancouver, it's almost a chance. It's a scoring chance because they'll boot it in the box and they'll have a Breck Shea who's 28 feet tall put a hand on it. But when you have the lack of calls going your way and the reaction of Robinson, and it all comes, it trickles down, right? When you have the manager really being agitated on the sideline, yelling at the fourth official, yelling at the other bench, and creating a narrative throughout the game, your players are going to react a bit the same way and lose a little bit of that calm and that composure and could lead to something trouble. So depending on what happens tonight with the refereeing, I just hope Vancouver keeps their head a bit more cool.
Yeah, look. I have trouble seeing Vancouver winning this game. I like the experience factor for Seattle. Dempsey coming back. Vancouver, as Dave said, a little bit shaky at the back at times. I just don't see, well, I guess I can see a way that they can win this. Obviously they can because Vancouver has played fairly well and Seattle's been inconsistent in its own ways this year as well. And they have some injury issues, as Dave spoke to. But at the same time, it is hard to overlook the fact that Seattle figured out how to win in the playoffs last year. And the way that they played the first leg almost suggests that they still are going to approach it the same way. Now, that said, it's a very thin line when you're trying to play that way. And the MLS Cup final last year, they are the champions based on the fact that the ball didn't rotate one more time off Josie's head, right? So a little bit of luck goes another way, and a little bit of luck goes the wrong way tonight, and Vancouver could find a way through this. But that said, I think it is fair to suggest that Seattle is the favorite. heading into the second leg at home as the defending champions to find a way through. And that's kind of what I think is going to happen. I don't think this is going to be a thriller, but I do think that Seattle will advance, and they will probably play Portland in the conference final. And I ultimately predicted Seattle to make the MLS Cup final, to have a repeat of last year's was my prediction off the top, and I'm not going to back off it now, Kevin.
Yeah, no, exactly. But tonight, I have a feeling that here it is. I predict the Cascadia team to win tonight.
There you go. That's very daring of you. Very, very, very daring.
And I predict there'll be at least one Cascadia team in the Western Conference Finals.
Yes, that is also a very daring prediction. I had to think about that for a second. I'm overtired.
Yeah, there's two teams.
Note, probably we should wrap. Real quick note, I know there's been news, NASL, USL, MLS, and all that sort of stuff. We are working on having a bit of a show about that, or not an entire show. Obviously, we're focusing on the game tonight, tomorrow too. But
we're working to understand first. We're working to grasp the situation, and we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. All right. On that note, as always, Kevin, say goodbye.
You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. Playoff game tonight. We'll talk about it tomorrow on Soccer Today and preview the weekend in Major League Soccer playoffs and in the Premier League and anywhere else where soccer is called football. And until then, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.